Good evening and welcome to the Tuesday, March 10th, 2026 study session of the Olympia City Council. For the record, we have a quorum with all council members present tonight. So we have one business item for the study session this evening, and it is the Olympia Fire Department's Community Risk Assessment and Standards of Cover briefing. And we have our Fire Chief, Matt Morris, with Hillary Flowers, our Deputy Chief, and Stephanie Porter, who is our Business and Operations Specialist with the Olympia Fire Department. And I'll turn it over to the Chief.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share some information with you this evening. We're super excited to share the work that we've accomplished over the last 18 months or so on the standards of cover. And so what I'd like to do tonight is I'm going to kind of offer a little bit of an introduction overview of kind of the vision and intent, and then Chief Flowers and Stephanie are going to walk you through some of the specific information and data and talk about our organizational performance and kind of the strategic intent on how and the opportunities that we may have to improve some of that performance, and then we'll kind of wrap it up after that. We first came before council in mid-24 and presented our strategic plan. Talked about our mission and our vision and our shared beliefs as an organization, and our intent to build community trust and to help build a safer, more vibrant community. As a fire department, our greater purpose is simply just to take care of people in the community, whatever that may be, and that to meet them where they're at. In order to do that, we need to ask a lot of questions and be familiar with and educate ourselves about our community and the needs of our community and the people in them. And so from that strategic plan and through the work plan, we came back mid last year, and kind of presented to you the concept of a standards of cover. And so tonight, I'm excited to present to you a final draft of that. Everybody in this room is very familiar with a comprehensive plan, and this document really is a comprehensive plan of sorts specific to the fire service and fire services in the city of Olympia. It's data-centric. The model follows that of the Centers for Professional Service or Public Safety Excellence, which is the fire accreditation process. And so we use that process to kind of set the template for us. So the overall arching intent and the vision of this process for the Olympia Fire Department is to be able to be transparent in our community about this is who we are, this is our community, this is what we do for our community, and this is how well we do it. And here's the plan to get better, right? And so that's what we're excited to share with you. As we've gone through this process, we've found things that we needed to improve on immediately. And one of that was our data management, data gathering, data tools. Stephanie Porter has been a fantastic asset to our organization. Her job description is not specific to that of a data analyst, but she has a very strong ability and skills and passion for it, and we're very fortunate to have her on the team. We had to lean into new data collection software. One of those you'll see tonight is this Dark Horse system. And in the midst of that, of course, then at the national level, they changed the national reporting software was changed on us. And so that delayed us probably by about 6 months in our process, just because we had to implement that on from the national requirements. So having said all that, here we go. So why do we have a standards of cover? It provides a platform for measurement and improvement, continuous assessment, and clear expectations. That's the bigger why. Because if we're going to be an organization that exists to take care of people, then we need to understand what the people need, and then we find a solution to their needs, right? So how do we do that? So this document you have in front of you, if you want to follow along with me, because I'm sure it's a very long, lengthy document. I'm not going to spend this evening reading it to you or going word for word on it. Break it down into a couple big sections. The first section is we completed what's known as a comprehensive risk analysis of our community. And so we looked at everything that we could find about the city of Olympia to help identify the risks in the community as it relates to public safety, the fire service, emergency medical services, and our core services. As you look at this document from page 6 to 49, really starts to identify and speak to those things. I'll kind of pull your attention to page 24, which is about the service area boundaries. And so we look at the boundaries of the city of Olympia's city boundaries, and then we have our fire station planning districts. 4 fire stations in the city of Olympia, each of those is a planning district. That will be a theme throughout this evening as we talk, and as we go through the data, it'll talk about the different fire districts and the data and the performance as it relates to each of those. If you kind of look beyond that, and then onto page 29, I'll draw to you some of the data in the GIS layering in the census data that we're able to collect, and some things to consider as we look as our planning zones and we establish our delivery distribution system, the way we provide our resources to respond and mitigate risk in our community. A couple of things that stand out to us. When we break it into our 4 response areas, the 4 stations, and if you look at on the graphs that you see on page 29, the percentage of seniors in each of our areas. Station 3, which is that's kind of that southeast direction of the city, 30% of the population in that area are over 60. Kind of a significant statement. Right, so as you consider that, if you look at the diversity index speaks to the likelihood that the people in that area are more diverse or less diverse than the county as a whole. So it's kind of a comparison index. And so you see like areas like Station 2, Station 4, the west side, east side, their diversity is greater than that than the rest of Thurston County. So just to kind of give you a reference. And as you kind of thumb through the next few pages, you see a lot of graphics for each of the response areas. It's the same information for each response area, and we just tried to pull apart as much dependable, reliable, defendable information that we could to identify any gaps in equity and any gaps in service as it relates to the community that we serve. What that drives us to next then from there is we start talking about what are our core services. So currently the City of Olympia Fire Department has core services. Fire suppression, emergency medical services are obviously the 2 big ones, wildland fire, technical rescue calls, and then marine shipboard. Fire suppression, emergency medical, these are our core services because they're the response to these types of emergencies in our community. Not based on the frequency, but also based on the consequence of an incident like that in our community, the impact it will have in our community, as well as the demand on the fire department to look at and mitigate. How much of your fire department resources have to be dedicated to mitigate a certain type of an event? Right? What's the total impact in the community? And so those core services kind of emerge. It leads us down into the next piece in an area that we identified early on, an opportunity for improvement in the organization is risk reduction behaviors and risk reduction programs. The fire department is 117 people, 101 of those are dedicated to emergency response, right? We only have 4 people dedicated to the fire marshal's office, which is a big piece of the CARES, of the community risk reduction behavior, right? And so our opportunity to expand public education, expand risk reduction campaigns, we're partnering with the Thurston County through emergency management, and so we're looking and seeking opportunities to have a bigger impact in our community on the prevention, preparation side of things, right? And so I think that there's room for there in the future as we partner with, it becomes a really good opportunity to function on a regional level. And that kind of speaks to the risk reduction when I mentioned emergency management partnership with Thurston County. The next part, we talk about the historical demand for services. And so we start, now we know our core services, we know our community, we understand the pieces and parts and specifics of our community. Then we look at historically as a fire department, what have we been doing? And so we pull all of that data and we start to look at, well, things about, oh, well, how frequent does that happen? Is that something that happens a lot? What does it take to manage that? And it begins a conversation about this thing we call the risk assessment, or the critical task or risk analysis. And so we start to group our call types, primary call types, fire suppression, EMS, tech rescue, and we start to group those by low, medium, and high risk. And each of those areas then have an associated number of firefighters that are required to mitigate that. Critical tasking. It's defined by the National Fire Protection Association, 1710. This type of an event requires this many people because you have to get these many tasks accomplished. And you can kind of see that as we get into like pages 92 and on, based on each of the different types of risk, based on the critical tasks. And so that becomes and starts to create what we call an effective response force conversation. This effective response force is broken into two main sections. One is your first arriving, first due, and then the rest is the balance of the force. And so a good example is a bedroom on fire, residential bedroom on fire in the city of Olympia. That risk category requires 17 firefighters to mitigate per critical tasking at 1710 national standards. The first piece of that is the first arriving engine. We want that within a certain time frame. That's a 3-person initial response. And then the rest of it comes with the following. And then we have a performance that we want to measure. How long did it take us to get all 17 members on scene to mitigate that, right? And so that becomes this conversation about first due effective response force and complete effective response force. Those are two of our key performance indicators you look at from our ability to have an impact on an incident. That bedroom's on fire, it's not going to get better until the fire department arrives, right? Today's construction types is you see flashovers, or when the fire flashes from one room to the next room, occurring anywhere from 6 to 9 minutes because of the nature of the materials today. So your first arriving engine you want on scene, national standard 7 minutes, 6 seconds. And you want them on scene 90% of the time to initiate initial fire operations. It's the same conversation about emergency medical services. Why do you want your first arriving medical response in 7 minutes? Because science will tell you that without that, cellular death and the ability to survive a critical medical or a critical trauma is very nil if it takes us longer than 6 to 8 minutes to get on scene initially, right? Cardiac arrest survivability. And so that's where those numbers come from. That's where the critical tasking comes from. That's why we talk about why do you send 3 engines, a ladder truck, why does all of that go to that call? And people ask, well, why do you send an engine and an aid unit and a paramedic unit to a sick patient? Well, that sick patient, because of the critical tasks, requires that many people to do the work. It's a national standard. Tracking? Making sense? Okay. And so that kind of leads into this whole risk by low, moderate, and high risk for each of the service or key service deliveries that we offer to the community, that the community requires of us. 2 of those are areas or services that are emerging and becoming higher risk in our community because of the significance of their events. So we look at the frequency, we look at the consequence, and then we look at the impact. So the frequency, how often it happens, obviously, right? The impact and the consequence talk to how many fire department resources does it take to take care of, and what's the consequence, what happens in your community if that thing happens and we don't manage it quickly and well, right? A bedroom fire in a community versus a large fire in one of your production facilities, and that would result in the loss of jobs. Both fires in your community, both happen infrequently, but the consequence in your community, for one, is much greater than the other in your community's economic impact and social impact, things like that. So as we lean into all of those things, then it becomes this conversation about, okay, so now how are we doing that? How are we performing in that? And with our current distribution and our current resource allotment. And so we do a self-assessment, right? And so that becomes this process of data analysis, which for some of us, we get a little excited about that. Some people don't. I kind of do, so. I know, right? Yeah, exactly, right? Yeah. Yeah, it's different things for different people, for sure. So I think at this point, what we'll do is I'll have Chief Flowers kind of start to begin the conversation with you about operations and how we provide the services we provide and at what performance levels. And I think Stephanie's going to wow you with this software system that we were able to procure this last year with the Dark Horse system and its ability to offer not only kind of a look back at your data and the ability to kind of give you a retrospective look, but it has a risk analysis prospective look where you can kind of do some more looking to the future. And I think that's exciting for us. So, Chief Flowers.
Good evening. I wanted to start by talking about where our stations were and what we had at each station, just so that when we get to the risk model and we let Stephanie do that, you kind of have a framework to look from. So Station 1 has a ladder truck, an engine, and a battalion. Station 2 has an engine and an aid unit and a medic unit. Station 3 is a single engine house, so that's off of 22nd and Boulevard. And Station 4 also has an engine, aid unit, and medic unit. So that is our complement. That's our minimum staffing, which is 24 personnel every day. So every day we will make sure that we have 24 minimum staffed. I don't have the slides, you do. Thanks. Another important thing, we highlighted a little bit station districts. So Station 1 has a district of 5.6 miles. Station 2 is 7.7. And that's the biggest area, and we start talking about performance, that will make more sense. It's a big area and a lot of places to go. It will make sense when you see the performance in that area. Station 3 is 5.4 square miles, and Station 4 is 2.2. That will also make sense when we start talking about performance because they have a small district. Their response is in a small area. They're able to get there quickly. Okay, so fire suppression. Chief Morris talked a little bit about risk, and we break risk down into medium risk and high risk as far as structure fires go. So a medium risk structure fire, we would consider that kind of your room and contents house fire. That's gonna have an effective response force of 17. So we're gonna ask and make sure that we have 3 engines, a truck, battalion, and then either an aid or medic unit. And we'll sub those in kind of in and out depending on where they're at in the system. That's our effective response force that we want. So if we don't have that, we will use our mutual aid or we will pull from other areas to grab that minimum response. In a high risk, so something like commercial or apartment, a medium rise or assisted living, so something that has a ton of consequence, also has impact, we're gonna have a bigger effective response force. So high risk, like a commercial structure fire, will have 28, and we will pull our mutual aid partners for all of those commercial structure fires. They will all have some sort of mutual aid component to them. If we think about wildland fires, so that's on page 60 in your book, we really start to think about those as May to October. We still do some fires. I think you just saw that we had one in the encampment this weekend, not unusual. But we can use our mutual aid partners. We have some staffing. We have a brush unit that we're able to cross staff, and then we can partner together with DNR to help mitigate that. So we have contracts in place for overhead support when it comes to big incidents. Most of our minor incidents we can handle on our own though. Tech rescue, we provide within the city, we provide confined space resources for public works, but we also participate in a countywide SORT program. So that's our special operations rescue. We do that countywide because it takes a significant amount of resources to staff a SORT call. So minimum is 6, and that's mandated again by NFPA and held a little bit more tightly with WAC. So there are very defined WAC requirements as it relates to entering in any confined space. So we train with that, we have a mutual aid agreement, and the whole county comes together to work on our SORT program. Marine and shipboard is an area where I would call this a weakness. So we have a boat, but we don't really have what I would call an effective response from a shipboard or a shipboard fire. Really, it's contain and try and isolate. So we don't have a way to mitigate that. We rely on our mutual aid resources. So we have West Pierce, we have Anderson Island, we have Tacoma Fire, but those are going to be impacted by both how the water looks and how quickly they can get there, and then if they have staffing available to staff those and respond mutual aid. Most of those, again, are going to be defensive, so we're not really going to be able to have an offensive or a quick response with shipboard fires. And then I want to change subject. So questions before we move to the next bit of info? No? Maybe? No? Okay. Okay. So I'm going to call to the annual review. So you should have a copy of the annual review in front of you. If you turn to page 2, you can see we broke out the number of responses by each of the station areas. We have several of the last year, so 21 through 25 to see that data. And then at the bottom, you'll see that we talk about our fire loss. So how much is that consequence from fire as it relates to structure fire loss? So what did we lose this year from fires? So this year we would add to our total, we'll talk about the Landis Point Apartments in a couple of minutes. That fire loss was about $800,000. If you turn to page 5 or the next page, we talk about the top 5 incidents, and I think this highlights each of the differences in the different station areas. They really do kind of have their own kind of flavor and what things they respond to most. Station 4 is located near Lily Road. We can imagine what they see. They see a ton of geriatric patients, all like we would expect. They have a ton of adult family homes. They have a ton of skilled nursing facilities. They're right next to the hospital. We would expect to be that primary, would be that patient population, and that's reflective in the data. If you think about Station 3, that's kind of a bedroom community. That's where all of our residential is. They don't have the number of assisted living facilities. They don't have skilled nursing facilities within their district. Station 2's area, same kind of as Station 4. They do have skilled nursing, assisted living, both in there. So that impacts their call volume and their responses. They also built those long after Station 2, so they're not really in an ideal way. We would have asked them to build them next to Station 2, but they didn't. If we look at the different types of fires, those again I think are pretty telling of the station. So if we go down to kind of that middle part and we break down, we see a lot of beauty bark fires in Station 1 and 2 and 4. 3 is really house fires, right? That is what that kind of district witnesses. And then
Deputy Chief,
Yeah.
we have a question
Oh,
from
yeah,
Councilmember
absolutely.
Green.
Thank you, Mayor. And you actually just started, you just mentioned my question. Why is beauty bark so hazardous? What is going on?
Well, smokers aren't always great with their disposal, and so you get a lot of cigarette butts into the beauty bark, and that's usually the primary cause.
Thank you. I learned so much already today.
And then you'll see outside rubbish, trash, or waste fires. Really, that's warming fires. So I think there's some data points that could be cleaned up internally, and that's a lot of warming fires is what you'll see from that, and it just kind of depends on how it gets categorized that day. You'll also see that with, I think, clean up a little bit with nearest and narrowing in. They did give us more options in nearest, so I think you'll see that data get better over time. And then the last, just high hazard type by station area, is pretty self-explanatory what we would expect to see. Okay, on to the fun part. So reliability, we're gonna circle back to reliability. Reliability is the ability for a station to be in their home station area and respond to the call dispatched to in their station area. So if we're at Station 01, they're off of East Side Street, their reliability would be, are they in their station area and are they responding to a call within their area, or is another station area or district calling them? So that's what we call reliability.
Just to offer perspective on that is when we talk about that first due unit and that effective response force, the ability to put a resource on scene within that first 7 minutes and 6 seconds, 90% of the time. If that's not if that apparatus is not in their district for that call, and we have to send like Station 1 into 4's area to cover that call, obviously you'll never make that 7 minutes, 6 seconds. As soon as you have to go to the second due or the next out station to take that call, it kills your performance, right? And so.
Performance is response time in its entirety of collection. We'll break that down here in just a second. NFPA 1710, we've kind of highlighted our goal is 7 minutes and 10 seconds. And I'm going to ask you to walk between the next two pages. So if you turn to the following page, oh geez. She'll go back one more. Will you go to slide 16? Other way, yep, one more. So alarm processing is the time from when the call comes into TCOM until it is alerted within the station. So that's the alarm processing time. TCOM made some huge advances in the last year. They went from an analog system to a digital system, so we now have digital dispatch, and they only dispatch a single time. So once they get the call received, they can hit the dispatch and continue receiving information about the call and change resources if needed. But they were able to take off about 25 seconds off of their time. So their performance has increased dramatically within the last year. So kudos to them for upgrading technology. Turnout time is the place where I, as operations, can effectively change. So we can do some work in that area within. Turnout time is the time from notification until they're able to hit responding in the rig. And then last is travel time. And travel time is what travel time is. Travel time, though, is mitigated or influenced by traffic. It's influenced by their ability to move within our traffic structures. So when we see things like medians or a narrow street, that does make it more challenging to pass. And then just kind of time of day is the other thing that generally will impact those. Those three things together create performance. So we put that all together, dispatch, our turnout time, and our drive time, to create our response time, and that is what we measure performance, is that total package. So
Deputy Chief?
Yeah.
Do you keep data when you have calls that, I guess, cross station boundaries? Mm-hmm. Okay. And so is that factored into travel time at all, or do you just keep the data separately?
It's not factored into travel time separately. It does just impact their time. So we can look later, I think, in the presentation. Maybe you can pull up the slide that has call concurrency. So Dark Horse tells us how often we have call concurrency, and we have roughly about 30% of the day we will have more than one call happening at a time, and that's what's going to affect that being pulled into a different district.
In addition, Mayor, so when we're looking at performance, we look at performance of two things. The first two, ERF, and then the ERF as a total. And so the first arriving unit, we look at their performance for that first arriving. And so when we look at their total performance, their drive time would be part of that. And so if you were to pull a single call and look at the structure fire and how long did it take to get the first engine on scene, if that doesn't meet the 7 minutes and 6 second requirement, then you would pull it apart and find out why. And you would see, oh, well, their dispatch time was fine, their turnout time was fine, but then they had a 15-minute response time. Well, it's because engine 4 went into station 1's area or whatever. And so then you would be able to start to do your analysis as to why you didn't meet your performance.
So if we flip back to the sheet that talks about reliability and performance, we can see our reliability in all of our station areas except for Station 3 is actually pretty darn good. It's almost to where we want it. Station 3's reliability is not quite where we want it, and we know that it's not where we want it because we use engine 3 to cover for training. So we pull that engine to cover into an area that has more call volume so that we're able to maintain our training and cover calls in the core of the city. So we impact their performance because we don't have enough units, or we don't have the units to cover for training. Does that make sense? Oh, you weren't going to? I thought you were, okay. If we look down at performance, we see Station 1 is at 67%. Station 2 is at 36%, so 90% of the time they're not quite where we want them to be. When we look at impacts and the reason why, if we went back to the slide that said, how big is the district area of District 2? Two's district is 7.7 square miles. So we know that that has a tremendous impact. We also know that one of their highest areas of call volume is located right next to, CMC. And so think about kind of where they're located. They're on the west side, they're off of Kenyon, and then think about where CMC is and the drive time it takes to get there. So that's where a significant amount of their call volume happens. And we'll walk through that when we get to Dark Horse. Station 4, we look at Station 4's area. Station 4 has a small district. It's 2.2 square miles. It was built once we had some good data. It was placed in an area that we knew we had some larger call volumes. And so it really is what we would ask of a station. It's in the area that it receives the most amount of time or the most amount of calls, and it has a small district, so it's able to respond and keep both reliability and performance. I'm going to pause there and make sure we don't have any questions. No? Okay. So now I'm going to give Stephanie a second to catch up and bring up Dark Horse.
So I'm going to give a little bit of an intro for this because we're super excited about this software platform. And so we partnered with Lacey Fire District 3 to bring the cost of this down and to get it within our existing budget, to have it implemented and the annual licensing fees. Our IT department did a fantastic job of vetting it and helping us get it implemented. And so through some regional partnership and some cost savings, that way we were able to bring this tool into the organization, which I think you're going to find interesting. So
this is the home screen, or kind of what they call the headquarters screen within Dark Horse. Chief Morris has highlighted this is the first time as an agency we've really started to look at data. So this is the starting point. This is where we go from, and this is how we determine both what we're doing, but also how we can improve. We've started the conversation and started educating our workforce about what it means to have performance, about how we personally impact performance, and about controlling the things that we can control. So things like turnout time. So we're able to share these numbers. We can look at them daily, we can look at them weekly, monthly, quarterly, and then of course annually. And that's what we use to build this annual report, is this platform.
Councilmember Green has a question.
Thanks, Mayor. So you can look at it all the time and in all those interviews. Have you established, like, ideally how frequently do you look at it, or how frequently do you assess it?
We've been looking at it monthly. Whether or not we start to do it more frequently, I think is still to be determined. But ideally, we want to make sure that we're looking at it at least monthly.
Okay, thanks.
yeah, I would offer that it just kind of depends on what the topic is you're looking at, based on data set size. And so, I would caution that we would look at things that have very few occurrences, because the swing in your percentages will be great with a small data set. And so, when you look at call volume in 3's response area, we're going to want to look at a longer time frame, because it doesn't run as many incidents in that area versus like Station 2 on the west side.
Okay. Well, you addressed my question perfectly, which was just really around, I know the temptation to look at data all the time because you have it all the time is really exciting. So I appreciate that you've set some boundaries around that.
I'm going to ask Stephanie to go to Station 2's area, and we're going to talk about performance. So one of the places in Station 2's area that we know we could improve performance is in their response times. Station 2 has an analog alerting system. So that means, like TCOM, they upgraded to digital. We believe that's about a 20-second delay. And I know that because I've sat in the station, I get the alerting on my phone, and then I wait for their station house tones. So at night, that's impactful, because it means if they don't have a phone that has an alerting system on it, they're waiting for station tones. So I'm going to ask Stephanie to change and subtract 20 seconds off of their current run times and look at Station 2's area, and you'll watch what happens directly around that station. And you'll see that their performance improves because their turnout time could improve. So that's where we start thinking about, how do we make our decisions to affect performance? Do I invest in a station alerting system because I know that it will improve performance? Absolutely. That's an easy way for us to improve performance, is to improve with digital alerting. Next place is to improve in Station 2's area is I told you where all of the call volume was. It was right next to CMC. There's about 6 addresses there that make up about 800 calls a year. And if we add a station in that high volume call area, you can also improve. And so you can see the performance over on the left will tell us what it does to our overall performance, not just the performance within the city. But you can see just by looking what that does. So when we start to think about long-range planning, this is the tool that we use because it does predictive modeling. So you could say, Chief Flowers, I want to look at a piece of property located here. And we can go and find the exact grid within Dark Horse and say, well, what would that do to our performance? Is that the best area? Is that where we should be investing our future in? Questions? Yeah.
Councilmember Vanderpool.
I'm going to ask an obvious question the public would probably want to know is, if you go right to the edge of the west side of the map there is a fire station that sits right on the edge. That's a regional fire. It sits right on the, and I know that we're not a part of that, but it's right up against the edge of that red. Mm-hmm. I understand that we have different boundaries and we have different resources, but it's right there. And I know that's a point of conversation, but I just want to ask.
We can't forecast the data within this model set without asking our partner agencies to also have it. So we could get that data if that agency used this same data set, because we could import their data and then actually talk about what it looked like to have a mutual response or how that would impact those response times.
Okay.
I'm glad you asked this question because I had this very conversation with the chief, maybe 2 weeks ago in a one-on-one. We were talking about all this, and I said, hey, McLean's got a fire station on the west side, and as we think about deployment of services, and what's really important here to think about is we talked about boundaries, which means they have their service area where they're tracking the same information about them being first on scene and within their areas. So if they're first on scene within our areas and then a call comes in their boundaries and they don't have the same kind of backup, then they're going to be late to the calls within their service area. So even though they're adjacent, they have an area that goes further out into Black Lake, and it makes it much more challenging for them to be first responders to us. Now, mutual aid's a different story, right? Because we can be first on scene, and they may be the closest ones to give us mutual aid. But when it goes the other way, it makes it more difficult. Did I hit that okay?
Yeah, I think that's a fair characterization of it. I think that our responsibility to our taxpayers, to our communities, to provide services within the areas that they pay their taxes to support. I think it's mutual aid, auto aid systems that run across jurisdictional boundaries are beneficial, but it should never be the solution to a first due consistent basis. It should be only in the event of extreme circumstance. I will say that this is the conversation that creates a conversation about regionalization of emergency services, because this is a very common occurrence where building a fire station on the edge of a jurisdiction doesn't make a lot of sense, right? Because then you're only responding into half of your area. But when you share those resources in a regional, and it makes the cost, pro-rationing of the cost and the contribution to it equitable to the jurisdictions, then it makes sense, right? And so.
I'm glad you're saying that, because most of that is to retirement homes and those services, and I'm like, wow, if we were regionalized, hypothetically, having an aid card just sitting over there could help a lot, just thinking about that.
The story I shared earlier today was in my previous experiences, 2 jurisdictions sharing a border, not regionalized. The one jurisdiction had financial difficulties and they were forced to close fire stations. So they chose to close the fire stations that were on the border of the other jurisdiction, knowing that that jurisdiction would then cover their city, which created a legal battle between the 2 jurisdictions, because the jurisdiction that was paying for it took exception to that. So it's something to think about.
Councilmember Gilman.
To follow on this thread, first, I'm looking at this Station 2 and modeling another station near Capital Medical Center and the various elder care facilities. The either first or second most prevalent call out of Station 2 was invalid assist. And I'm wondering because we've talked about that as a potential for both education and alternative response if it's somebody fell out of their bed and the staff there can't hoist them back in. So how do you,
She's done a lot of research.
yeah, so tell me a little bit of this, and the chief's told us these stories before, Deputy Chief Flowers, about you have to have staff to run a fire engine in case there's a structure fire. But I can't help but think about the EMS calls separately from the fire calls when you're thinking about a second West Side station.
Yeah. So one of the things that I first looked at when I got into my role as Assistant Chief of EMS is we can't possibly go to all of these facilities this many times and it be for the right response with the right emergency, right? And then I asked Stephanie to pull data, and we got into the weeds, like down to the number of calls, the type of calls, the resource that showed up, and then the outcome. And I will give the nursing home some credit in the sense that, one, I do think most of the time they use the right resource. So we may go for an invalid assist, but per protocol, if that person is on a blood thinner, the nursing home is always going to mandate a transport, and that's to mitigate their risk. So because of the patient population that they serve, most of them will be on some sort of a blood thinner. Most of them will require transport. It's very rare out of a facility that you just go and help someone up and then they don't request transport. At home, most people will have a slip and fall, and oftentimes it's just a help up. They had a rug and they slipped, or they slid out of their chair, they slid off the bed, and we can assist them back up. In the nursing home, they won't mitigate risk in that way. So we're very careful to educate them to make sure that they understand what our job is versus what their job is. But to their credit, I actually think they're using the appropriate services within our agency the way that we should be using them.
This is one of the driving forces behind the need for the BLS aid unit at the west side. And so now those calls are now handled by the aid unit, and we're not rolling the fire engine to that we used to have to because it was the only resource available to us. And so now we are able to send the correct resource to the type of call, to the nature of call, and the extent of the emergency of that call, and mitigate it with appropriate resources rather than a fire engine, which was not necessary there. So that's one of those contributing factors of that aid unit.
We're going to go to Station 3 next. And when I think about, from an operations chief, what do I do to mitigate risk within a station area? One of the things for Station 3 is being able to keep it in its home area, being able to keep it in its district. There's a couple of ways we can do that. We can add resources to the core. Something like an aid unit to Station 01 allows that unit to be in its station district most of the time. The second place to mitigate risk within Station 3's area is by adding a fourth firefighter. So if we go back to our response and we think about effective response force, the other way that we do that is that's a big district and we're not particularly close. So the second in engine is a distance. It averages probably 10 to 12 minutes to get that second in engine into District 3's area. You can add a fourth firefighter, which allows them to mitigate their own emergencies immediately. So by state law, we have to have 2 firefighters in and 2 firefighters out before we can make entry. So if we go back to our medium risk, which is primarily what Station 3's area is, it's primarily homes, and we think about what do they experience? They experience kitchen fires and bedroom fires. And the way to mitigate that risk is by having an immediate response and setting that station up to manage itself. All different ways we can think about how do we effectively get them their effective response force quickly. And then last, I wanted to end with Station 4. So Station 4, we highlighted, had been built a little bit later. It's our newest station. It has the smallest district, and it was built in the area that has the highest volume of calls. So you see immediately around that station, it actually is all green because it's where it's supposed to be. It's doing everything that we ask it to do. It has good performance, it has great reliability, and it's built where we want it to be at. So kind of everything that we could ask for from a station. And last, I wanted to end us on just kind of an experience that we had and what it actually means to get an effective response force. So at the end of January, we had a structure fire at the Landis Point Apartments, which is in Station 4's area. and I'll give Stephanie a chance to get where we were. So we talked about call concurrency and how about 30% of the time our vehicles or our engines are out on other calls. And I want to say everything was perfect this night. So if there was ever a day for it to be perfect, this was the night. Everyone was at home, in their district, in their stations, where they were supposed to be. So the Landis Point apartment fire had amazing dispatch times. So their dispatch time from time of call entry to time of dispatch was about 15 seconds. So whatever the caller said to paint the story, I give them great credit for, because the dispatcher immediately toned a commercial fire alarm package. She received the call, 15 seconds later, she does that. She stays on the phone and takes the call for about another minute or so, so it does kind of end with its final alarm processing time. But our first arriving unit was on scene in 5 minutes and 55 seconds. Engine 04 was on scene at 6 minutes and 3 seconds, and 804 was on scene at 6 minutes and 6 seconds. Other things that went phenomenal. The engine officer gave a great size up and called for a second alarm. So we knew that that was going to be a big fire just by the arrival and by what they found. So they called for additional resources. So on top of what we would ask for that high risk package, we asked for that again because it was such a high risk and we knew that we were going to need additional resources. By the time we got to our full effective response force for the initial commercial fire alarm structure package, it was 15 minutes and 13 seconds. Which is an actually phenomenal response to have that many resources in their home district and able to respond at that time. We were also lucky that it was at night, so our traffic implications were much less. Sometimes that area can get congested. We also didn't have to fight traffic coming from the west side, and sometimes that can impact response times. So this is what we want it to look like. We talk about meeting that NFPA 1710 standard as being there in 7 minutes and 6 seconds. And they were able to do that. The first arriving engine was there in under 7 minutes and 6 seconds. We had a fire loss of about 800,000, which is significant. I will offer, had the first arriving engine not been there, and it was our second arriving engine, which was engine 01 at 10 minutes and 5 seconds, we would have lost the building and it would have gone into the second building. I know that listening from their report, I know it from watching kind of what they had said in their reports and then talking to them, it was starting to extend into the next building, and we were fortunate to have crews there be able to mitigate it quickly. That's the difference between a couple of units or $800,000, so the consequence, or losing 2 full units by not having it. So highlight and a kudos to the crew. They did a phenomenal job with that structure fire, but it really highlights what we talk about when we talk about effective response force and meeting those times given to us by NFPA.
City Manager Bernie.
Yeah, not a question. As they finish with the presentation, I just want to say, I've been here 27 years, the last 17 of those in the city manager's office. And this is probably the most comprehensive set of performance data that I can remember ever seeing. And it's something that we've been asking for a long time. The ability to really dial in to just get an answer to every question we have about response, about deployment, about safety of our firefighters and making sure they have what they need, about community safety and response time. And the ability through the standards of cover work, their strategic planning work, and the performance data that you see in front of you just presents us with a really amazing opportunity to continue to figure out what are all the tools and resources that we need. We started to have that conversation in Finance Committee last week. You have a fire CFP that's pretty robust for the first time in a long time, and we're going to be talking about that as a larger council real soon. And we have that because we have data that suggests what we need in order to really be at the standards that we want to be within our community. Now, it's going to be hard to get there overnight because we're talking about millions of dollars when you're talking about new stations and new apparatus, but there's a pathway in front of us and some data that supports it. So I just want to say thank you to chiefs for all this work, because it sets a new standard for how we're going to measure performance in the fire department. And it's something that, Chief, when you started, I told you we dramatically needed, and you went right to work on it. So just a lot of gratitude.
Thank you. I appreciate that very much. It's been a good project. It's been a good process in the organization. And Chief Flowers mentioned a couple times that our ability to be transparent within our own organization and share our organizational needs and performances with our own folks, and so that they have a better understanding and feel for the work that they do and the impact that it's having in the community. I think when we look at our performance as an organization, there's a couple of key factors that I think as a city and as leaders in the community that we should consider. One is the impact this has on our WSRB rating, which is our insurance rating for all of our occupancies in the city. We're currently at WSRB 2. The best is 1. There's not many of those in the state. We went from a 1.4 to a 1.8 in our last rating, and as soon as it hits a 1.9 to a 2, it'll go to a 3. And so it's drifting that direction because of the impact that the community changes and our ability to meet performance standards. And so we have an opportunity to get ahead of that over the next 5 to 10 years and prevent that drift from occurring any further. I think that, as we look at this, there was a couple of key points that I would emphasize to you as a policymaking group. One of those is that there are emerging risks in the community that we have not traditionally had to mitigate. One of those is the wildfire risk. I think we all support the conversation around climate change and the impact that's having in our climate here regionally. Anecdotally, if you talk to a firefighter 30 years ago, they never ran a brush fire on I-5. It wouldn't go anywhere. And now today, a brush fire on I-5 is a big event. And it's driven by the fact that climate is changing, it's drier, it's hotter in the summers, and we have bigger weather events that contribute to that. So that's an emerging risk that we are currently not well suited to mitigate because we have not had to do that before. And so the conversation about training, equipment, apparatus, legal implications, our ability to support on a regional level, at the DNR level, and deploy not only within our own boundaries, but outside of that, state, region. The conversation about the fires that we saw in Los Angeles last year and why didn't the city of Olympia, deploy to that? We're not suited for that. We're not equipped, trained, or prepared for that. If that's a vision that we want to have to be a deployable agency, then there's work that we would want to do. But it's an emerging risk within our own boundaries, right? And so that's something that we want to invest in and get ahead of sooner than later. As an example. And so Chief Flowers mentioned that we use Engine 3 to cover other districts because of call volume or training demands. Engine 3 is the slowest district when it comes to frequency of events because it has the fewest number of incidents. So it's a risk management that we make as an organization. It's more likely that the next emergency is going to occur downtown than it does in that area. And so we use that engine to cover downtown when downtown's busy, right? We're robbing from Peter to pay to Paul to a certain extent. And there's the potential that that's going to come back on us, that we're going to pull 3 to cover 1's area and something's going to happen in 3's area and we've left it uncovered. So it's something to think about that we didn't used to have to think about because the demand for services and the training demands were different 20 years ago. It's an emerging change, right? And so in the last 2.5 years, we've hired nearly 50 new employees as a result of attrition as well as the BLS program. There are 96 people assigned to operations as a total, 96 positions. Half of them have been in the organization less than 3 years. So the demand for training is greater than it's ever been. Right? Our firefighters make decisions based on 2 things, what they know from experience and what they've been taught. If they've never seen it and never been taught it, they won't know and have the ability or the skills to make good decisions. And we set them up for failure. In the absence of experience, I can't create experience, I can only create training. Training is essential in our organization, more now than ever. Right? We can't rely on the institutional knowledge and experience of the 30-year employee that we used to be able to rely on. And so we have to train, which means we have to cover areas while they train. They have to be able to train uninterrupted. So I have to be able to take a station out of service for a couple hours and let them train and cover them with another. So I'm going to move resources around to do my best to spread the coverage around the city. So that's a risk that we're taking that I think as a city we should be talking about, planning for, and how do we help mitigate that as we look to the future. And then the last piece I would offer is the cost and the ability to plan to the future for resources and deployment of existing and future resources. It's a long-term conversation. It's predictable, and so it's preventable. We should never sit in this room and be surprised that we need to add resources. By the time we're adding it, you should have heard from the fire department 32 times at least that is next year, 2 years, 3 years, next year, and here it is, right? That's how this should work for you, and especially for the city manager, right? I should never, as a fire chief, be in the city manager's office talking about the need for a fire station or fire apparatus from an emergent crisis perspective. We should have been talking about it for 5 years by then, right? And so that's the intent with all of this comprehensive planning and data analysis is so that we can get ahead of those things and make good, sound decisions based on data that supports it and not based on our anecdotal gut or our feelings. Right? And so I appreciate the opportunity to do this work. I appreciate the opportunity to have the conversation with all of you and just try to influence and and inspire in the conversation that the ability to provide exceptional public safety services is never easy and it's always expensive, right? Most of that we have absolutely no control over, right? We don't control the price of apparatus. Collective bargaining is collective bargaining. It's all legally driven. We just have to figure out a way to support it, right? And so, as you all know, this is my last meeting, right? Next week is my final week with the city. I want to say thank you. I am full of appreciation and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to have been part of the organization, to offer influence or inspiration. I appreciate and will always be thankful for the trust that the city manager and all of you have placed in me. But even more so, I'll be always in awe of the trust that the members of this organization placed in me. You have an exceptional fire department. You have exceptional people that work in your fire department. They are some of the hardest working, most dedicated, caring, compassionate professionals that you will ever have an opportunity to interact with. I've been doing this for 36 years. It's an exceptional fire department, right? Our role, our opportunity as leaders is to take care of them so that they can go take care of the community. Being a firefighter, being in public safety, being a first responder, that work that they do is really lousy work. It's dirty, it's scary, it's dangerous, it tries to hurt them, it will hurt them. Firefighters have a 20% greater likelihood of being diagnosed with cancer than the general population, 14% chance of dying from cancer. The number one cause of death in firefighters in the nation today is suicide. They do a work that nobody else wants to do or can do. And they do it willingly, right? I just ask that as we move forward, that we remember that if we take care of them, they will take care of our community, right? And that the work that they do is exceptional. So again, thank you for your opportunity, for the opportunity to be part of the team. I will take it with me forever, so thank you.
Thank you, Chief. City Manager Bernie.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You beat me to it, Chief. So, I know. Well, I'm not going to be there next week because I'm going to be in D.C. and I'm going to miss your final day here. But I got you tonight, right? So I'm not going to miss this moment. So I appreciate council giving me one here. So, Chief, I think back to when you were hired and we had a conversation in my office about all the things we needed to accomplish. And I gave you this laundry list, and I wrote them down as I was sitting here. We need to catch up on our hiring. right? I know you're not all the way there, but boy, we've come a long way in a short period of time. We wanted, the members of the department, I remember when I was interviewing all of them about what we need in the chief, they said, we just want direction. We want a plan. We want to know where we're going. Check. We have a new strategic plan. We have a new comprehensive plan for the fire department. I asked you to help for a better long-term financial strategy so I could better inform the council and keep them in the know about what our needs are into the future, because I knew we were falling behind. And you've delivered all kinds of tools to help us do that. I asked you to get BLS implemented in a way that it could actually pay for itself. We're getting pretty close to that. I mean, I think if this year will be the year where we actually come out ahead when we look at GEMT billing, so just job well done. I asked you to build your leadership team, and you've really done an amazing job of building your leadership team and building those around you. And then finally, I said, it's something I ask of all directors, and you say it all the time, it's just take care of your people. And one of the things I appreciate about you, I've been to just about every one of your promotional ceremonies, and what is it you ask every one of your BCs, your lieutenants that you promote? One of the first things you say is, take care of your people. And if you take care of your people, everything else takes care of itself. And so you've done that. You've just been a gift to the city and to the fire department. I hear it over and over and over again from every one of those members in that fire department. They have just enjoyed every moment of having you as their chief. And so it's with mixed emotions for all of us. We're all happy for you and Val and to head off into what you're doing. But in just a short period of time you've been here, you've left an incredible legacy that's going to live far beyond your time as chief. So I have nothing but gratitude for you and appreciation for everything that you've brought to this role, because we needed you and you were the absolute right person at the right time to set us in a different place. So thank you.
It's well said, Jay. Thank you. Councilmember Gilman.
I just want to piggyback on what Jay was saying. And first, thank you. I have learned so much over the last couple of years, both about the fire department and the industry standards, but also more broadly about another way of doing strategic planning and assessing where we're at in a department. I think this model has helped to inform our other budgeting and analysis work across the city, and that's a really big impact. It's a really big impact. So I'm both impressed and convinced by the standards of cover, by the strategic plan, and that leads me to want to urge us all that if you feel like you need more numbers, let's ask for more numbers. If you need more stories or translation of the numbers, let's ask for them, because I think that there's the really obvious thing that we've been buying fire engines using year-end funds, emergency sorts, like, oh my goodness, we need to buy a multi-million-dollar vehicle. You know, that's something that, just like with any sort of piece of mechanical equipment like that, it has a life. And we've really pushed the envelope on our great mechanics keeping these vehicles up and running, but they're tired. So that's one thing this points to. And the other thing that's really makes an impression on me is when we had those your special Herod's Pythagorean, whatever it is there, it's kind of like a risk, like, you know, which way are you going to move to mitigate risks? The big chunk of those triangles off to the left is the relative risk to our firefighting staff. And I just want to acknowledge that is one of the things that we specifically mitigate as we talk about what resources we offer to the department. And as we go for those goals, they're not only to make sure that the community gets the fire service that they're expecting, but also that our firefighters go home to their families at the end of the day. So that's just a long way of saying I look forward to the capital facilities plan conversation, and I'm optimistic that if we're intentional together, we can find a way to make this dashboard tell the story that we would like it to tell. So, thank you, Chief.
All right. Any additional questions or comments? Yes, Councilmember Vanderpool.
So I was thinking about this tool and thinking about future, because you mentioned future usage, right? And I'd be very curious about if you put in future land use map or any of the other planning that we've done through the comprehensive plan, just drop it in there, right? The mall area redevelopment, right? And how much that would tell the story to the public of the need, right? Because we only have one truck with a tiller, right? Or engine, and then I had to say engine because someone would correct me later and give me a call and be like, Robert, that's not what it is. You've ridden along with us twice. You don't know what you're. Anyway, yeah, I think of like Station 2, right? It doesn't even have the capacity for one of those, right? And if we built taller buildings in the mall, suddenly we would need that because we'd be sharing it from downtown and back, right? So I wonder about using the tool to think about where we think the trends are going to be going, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great perspective and insight. You have the ability, if anything's a GIS layer, it has the ability to be layered on top of this, and we can use the vendor to do that for us. It's also a great opportunity that when we sit in those planning meetings with the other city departments and directors, to kind of demonstrate and show them the impact of the development conversation that they're having. What happens if we put this type of development here or that or the other? And we can show them based on historical data from around the nation what an anticipated impact would be. That offers the opportunity for planning. When we increase building risk, we increase population density, we increase health risk, and the ability to manage emergency services, those things all start to change. And I think the most important thing is to be, 2 decades ahead of that, right? And so then we're able to actually manage that, so.
Yeah, thank you.
Councilmember Green.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Thinking about that Capitol Medical Center area, obviously, the city doesn't own land there, and land there's in pretty high demand between the medical and commercial uses. Are there any cities, municipalities that you're aware of that there's any kind of public-private partnership? Because I have to think that for the folks operating, particularly the medical establishments, the assisted living facilities, whatever that is, like it's probably a problem for them as well if we're having to get into 8-minute response times and somebody's laying on the floor waiting for assistance to get transported. I just wonder if there's anybody that you are aware of that's kind of figured out that opportunity to say, hey, the folks operating in those areas, it would really benefit them to have better fire service. It would really benefit the city to not have to try to buy land there that's fully owned. So I don't know.
I appreciate that question. Absolutely, it's insightful that I think the opportunity to do any kind of partnership, whether it be regional or public-private partnership, are always something that we should explore. Other agencies do that. They lease facilities. They don't have to purchase or build traditional fire stations. There are non-traditional solutions to it, and all of those things are possibilities. What I would offer is that our intent to improve performance, that we recognize that the most difficult thing in that conversation is about purchasing land and building buildings. Mm-hmm. It's the most difficult thing to accomplish cost-wise and planning-wise. And that anything that we can do to improve performance that has impact, like what was mentioned about the station alerting, investing in a digital station alerting that can take 20 to 25 seconds off your notification time, which puts them out on the streets 30 seconds quicker, is a great solution, right? Traffic control devices, traffic, signaling, things like that, and investing in that. There are other opportunities, and so we want to start with the least costly, or the investment piece. What's our return on investment? I think there's the education within the facilities is a great opportunity as well. But yeah, I think ultimately the public-private partnership does occur. It's not common, but it does occur. I think the partnership between public safety entities, regionalization or partners and sharing resources, things like that, costing and allocating those costs, is another becoming a very common occurrence. It's, like I said before, providing public safety response services in any community is difficult and expensive. And any opportunity that we can share those costs and still achieve performance, we should be looking at.
Thanks.
All right. Well, If there are no additional questions, I have a couple, and then I also have some closing comments to wrap us up, if no one else does. Okay. All right. Maybe we can do rapid fire. Send you out with a bang. No, it shouldn't be too hard. My first question is there a average amount of time that the national standards change?
The national standards does not change frequently. It gets reviewed, I think it's every 10 years that the NFPA standards are reviewed. And recognize that response time standards from the national level is meant to be it's a big comprehensive process to cover every community in a nation. My experience with other agencies I've been part of, as well as the fire accreditation process I've been part of, is that most communities that I've been aware of, that their first due response times are usually right around 8 minutes, right, at 90% of the time. And that their full response is somewhere between 11 and 12 minutes 90% of the time. It becomes their benchmark targets that they're trying to achieve. And so if you looked at our city, Station 4 is basically there, right? And so we're achieving it in certain areas, but not in other areas, and we're going to achieve it better at certain times of day versus other times of day. And there's different influences to why we're not achieving that. So the solution is not going to be just one, the solution isn't just build another fire station, right? And so it's about other conversations along the way. And so, I think that, those standards are meant to be the best guideline. If you look at major municipal areas like New York, Philadelphia, those kinds of places, they have fire stations on basically every other corner because their density is so high and the traffic and the congestion is so big that, they pull out of their station and it takes them 8 minutes to go a block and a half, right? And so they build more fire stations. Versus other areas like rural population density will drive your response time standards as well. And so it's not practical to expect to have 8-minute response times if you live in an area where there's only 100 people per square mile. When you start to get past 3,000 people per square mile, which the majority of Olympia is considered an urban population density, then it becomes the response time standards are going to be the fastest standards, right? The city level standards. And so, and as you get outlying areas and further away and that density starts to drop, then those standards can decrease. I've seen rural response time standards as high as 12 to 15 minutes for a first arriving engine in a rural setting. Right now, we don't have any rural settings in the city of Olympia within our jurisdictional boundaries, but we do kind of flirt with the suburban versus urban density in certain areas.
Okay, thank you. So I want to go back to what you had said about wildfire response for a moment. And I'm just curious, is that something that is unique to City of Olympia firefighters, or is that something that is common in our region or statewide?
I would offer my perspective in the time that in the last 10 years that I've been involved with this process is it's an emerging risk in Western Washington as a general statement. I think that some jurisdictional boundaries have a greater risk than others. King County, anywhere you have the true urban interface where the residential properties and commercial properties are building into the wildland interface on the edge, that becomes a greater risk. And then you have the wildfire risk within your urban boundaries, the washes, Percival Creek, those types of risks as well. But by far, Western Washington, the emergence of large wildfires on the western side of the Cascades, just in the last 10 years, it's the fires we see today were unheard of 10 years ago. The fire at Lake Cushman last summer was something that nobody's ever seen before, right? And so that's only going to continue. And the fear of this coming wildfire season in Western Washington, because of the lack of snowpack, is in the wildfire, wildland, urban interface circles is emergency management is some people pretty terrified.
And so, and maybe you're on your way out just in the nick of time. So maybe, Deputy Chief, this is for you, but what's the plan to get our firefighters ready?
We've been working on that within training. So they do have some initial training in the ability to respond and cover wildland. When we think about being deployable, the requirements are quite a bit higher, and we also have to have rigs that can deploy. So we think right now about just mitigating our local risk, and we're not quite ready to take on being a deployable agency. So we're not ready to deploy into other agencies, and that really is going to take a decision at the policy level to say we're willing to invest that time and the annual training. So again, everything is driven by training and the requirements to have training. In the wildland kind of area, they also have different categories that they have to gain experience on actual fires. So, for example, an engine boss or someone that we would call a lieutenant here, in the wildland fire, they would call that an engine boss, and they would credential them within that area based on experience. They would say, you have to have this many hours leading your engine company and signed off on this number of skills to be qualified to do that. So we would really have to make an investment to say, we are going to go and we are going to be a deployable agency, or we're going to stay and be a city response and use our mutual aid partners and just be trained. And right now we're working on it. We have a couple of newer hired folks that came with some pretty significant wildland experience. And what we've committed to is ensuring that they maintain their experience. So we do have a couple folks that we just hired in the last 2 years that have engine boss criteria. We will support them to maintain that criteria so that we can figure out what we want to do as an agency and what we as a city want to do policy-wide to support them. But that's kind of our strategy right now.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I'm just glad. I didn't want to leave it on that note. I wanted to make sure that our community knows that we're preparing. So thank you. Well, Chief, it's been a huge honor. I am also going to be in DC next week and won't be able to, be there for your sending off. But I'll just say that obviously you've been a people first kind of guy. From the moment we first met, you were honest about the burnout of our firefighters. Really just being honest with us about those challenges and what you need to sort of address those things. So as the city manager said, there's been a lot of hiring. There's also, in addition to BLS Cares, we have, BLS, we also have CARES, which was, something we also were finally able to kick off under your leadership. And I'll just say that, when you are the head of a department, things make its way back to us, even if you don't think it does. We hear things. And so I'm going to take that as a sign that no news is good news. I think that you clearly, from what I can see, have had an impact on the morale, and caring for the people of our fire department is caring for the people of the city, because they're the ones that are responding, right? And so I just thank you for being very values-driven, for fitting into the culture here. It's always when you hire somebody to come in and, whether or not they're going to be supportive of the city's values. And I'm proud to say that you have been every single step of the way in your leadership of our department. So I thank you for that. And I wish you all the best, because you deserve it, right? And come back and see us, and come bother the deputy chief. All right, well, is there anything else? Anybody? Yeah, you definitely should.
$5. $5 surplus.
He's like, I'm gonna take it and throw it in my fire pit. All right. Well, this is the only business item that we have for tonight. So thank you again, Chief. So at this time, we're going to recess for 5 minutes, and then we're going to reconvene for an executive session pursuant to litigation and potential litigation. No decisions will be made, and we will meet in room 423 for up to 60 minutes, and after which we will be adjourned for tonight.